Mr. Michael Clark. Michael Clark is a PhD student at the University of Cambridge. He's undertaken a comparative analysis of the relationship between identity and foreign policy in the Lebanese Hezbollah and the Iraqi Sadrist movement, in particular towards the Arab Spring and the Syrian civil war. More broadly, Michael's interests cover the politics of Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay, hi everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me here. And yeah, I want to again focus on the Shia and maybe the overlooked story of terrorism and sectarian violence in the Middle East, and indeed in Syria and Iraq. So this is the story that we usually get: ISIS massacring the Shia, and it is, I think, an important, essential component of the ISIS phenomenon, this Rafida focus. But I want to just complexify the reasons behind the response from the Shia communities of the Middle East, especially from Iraq and Syria, but also Iran and Lebanon, and just complexify it a little bit and look at the other motivations that we can discern. Really, I want to address a series of questions. I don't have that long to do it, but I'm available for questions afterwards if it looks like I've kind of glossed over things. There's also a paper that we've researched for this, and I really would like to make that available to anybody because I'd welcome feedback on that. But the questions that I want to address are: can we talk of a concerted and centrally organised Shia response to ISIS? Have Shia actors taken up the fight in their own ways, according to their own interests and motivations, and with their own goals in mind? I want to look at the role that Tehran has played, and how the Islamic Republic has worked through proxy movements, but also alongside allies, not necessarily proxies, and in parallel even with rivals, Shia rivals, and how that's responded in Iraq and elsewhere in the region. And really whether we should be talking about a Shia response to ISIS, which, this kind of imagery provokes this idea, or whether we should be talking about responses, or maybe an Iranian response, or something different, and to think about it maybe in a more complex, nuanced way. This also, we have this nice image here. But really I wanted to ask whether we are talking about fragmentation in this response or cohesion. And what I really want to argue is that, yes, of course, there are many Shia actors on the forefront of this battle against ISIS, but that actually, because of religio-political splits over Wilayat al-Faqih and things like this, because of divisions between the Hausa, especially in Iraq, and more peripheral actors, like the Sadrist movement, it means that the Sadrist responses, the Shia responses, can't really be considered in full without addressing this idea that maybe cohesion now contains the seeds for fragmentation amongst the Shia, and indeed in the Iraqi state, within it, deep within it. So, the first thing I want to look at is this historical juncture, and I see that when we're thinking about this topic, we can talk about June 2014 being a historical juncture, and this is because it really brings to light the distinctions and nuances and complexities in the Shia communities and militias and actors involved. So the distinctions that are kind of drawn out by this are geographical, but they're also temporal. So for me, the 10th of June is a really core date, and this is what makes June 2014 this historical juncture. And I think the reason is because before this, of course, we had ISIS operating in Iraq and taking over prisons and so on and so forth, but there was this constant to and fro, and it looked maybe even that ISIS was being rolled back. Of course, this is not taking into account the political underpinnings of the phenomenon. But of course, on the 10th of June 2014, we see this conquest of Mosul, and that is a core moment. And the reason is it's got two main outcomes from that phenomenon, that thing that happened. The first was it prompted the fatwa that was mentioned, this fatwa of Sistani, which led to the formal establishment of the Hashd al-Sha'bi, the popular mobilization forces. And the establishment of the popular mobilization forces have had two main effects. One, there's huge knock-on effects for Iraqi politics and for Iranian projection as well, especially into Iraq, and also for trends among non-state actors in the Shia world. But also the establishment of the POF led to the demobilization of many of the agglomerate militias, Shia militias in Syria, and the return of people as well as militias to Iraq to join the PMF. And so it also had a significant negative impact on the Shia response to ISIS in Syria. And the second main outcome is it signalled a turning point in the Iranian policy, this pivot to Iraq, a redoubling of the war effort in Iraq, and deployment of more troops, especially alongside popular mobilization force militias. And I mean, of course, Iran has long been in Iraq, but this, the transfer of Qasem Soleimani from Syria to Iraq is just a token of this pivot. And this has had effects in terms of Iranian projection as well into Iraqi politics, and it has affected the relationship between the Iraqi militias, as well as having an effect in a maybe negative manner in the war against ISIS in Syria. So the main thing I think that these outcomes demonstrate really is how different the battlegrounds of Syria and Iraq are. And the main difference, which is kind of obvious, is that in Syria many of the actors involved in the Shia response there are foreign, because they're Iraqi or they're Iranian or they're Lebanese, Hezbollah for example. But in Iraq the majority are, I mean, of course Iran is there and maybe Hezbollah, but many are Iraqi. And so what June 2014 revealed was that this front, if we think of it as front, the front in Iraq has been prioritized by many of the actors that were involved in the Shia response, both in Iraq and in Syria and in Lebanon. So maybe we can, just to kind of sum it up, the Shia response to ISIS in Syria is a war of choice, from which they could withdraw when confronted with this more salient threat, maybe in Iraq. And then I just want to look at what maybe we can read from this, and I'll go very quickly, and it's much more detailed, unfortunately, in the paper, but I'm really happy to kind of go into those details. But what really can draw from this, for what this means about the motivations and interests of some of the actors that we're talking about. So the first one I want to look at is the popular mobilization forces and many of the militias involved. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, over 60 militias. There's an enormous number of militias, and I think it's a mistake to just homogenize and say, they're all doing the same thing, they're all responding to Sistani's fatwa. Yes, this is the motive, this is the catalyst cause, but and yes, of course, we can say, like, we have this operation to retake Ramadi being, we obey you, what's this, we obey you, Hussein, and then suddenly someone says, oh, this is a bad idea, okay, we obey you, Iraq. Okay, but I mean, post event, even this on a tangent, this thing of what is it, Mosul, Operation Conquer, as if words have no effect. But anyway, so yeah, of course, and I mean, I barely need to mention to this audience the extrajudicial killings, murders, tortures that many of these militiamen have done. Leading further to alienation and radicalization of Sunni communities, and even de facto demographic change, is reminiscent of ISIS advancing. It's also the Shia militias advancing and people leaving. I think we can be really clear that yes, these militias often act in this sectarian way, involving themselves in sectarian killings and terrorism, and it has a sectarianising effect, losing indeed maybe the political front in this war against ISIS. But and certainly we can say I think this is not necessarily a good thing for the Iraqi state, because it erodes the institutions of the Iraqi state, the Iraqi army, for example, with people deserting to join the militias. But I think it's a little bit more complex, because when we really look at many of the militias involved, particularly the ones more from the Sadrist side of things, we can discern that there is an element of nationalism to this. It's not necessarily clear-cut nationalism. It can be maybe sectarian conception of nationalism, but a nationalism of sorts. Some of the evidence for this would be, of course, Sistani's wording, being that citizens should come forward to defend the state and things like this. But I mean, also the fact that when confronted by the fights against ISIS in Iraq, many of these Iraqis returned from the fight in Syria. This is, there's an element of prioritization going on there. Of course, we can talk about the Sadrists and the Iraqi flag, and wanting to have the Iraqi flag everywhere with Saraya Salam and things like this, and the attacks of Sadr on the brazen killings. So I think it's a fair bit more complex, and we really need to look in depth at the motivations of each militia involved, because we can maybe get you can fail to see the wood for the trees, essentially. When we think about Iran, I think we need to consider that Iran, is Iran acting for sectarian interest? Is it acting to project according to realpolitik? Is it attempting to protect the gains that it's made in Iraq in terms of the gain that it really made from 2003? So this again can be nuanced a little bit more in terms of strategic interest, particularly at this time of kind of Cold War with Saudi Arabia. And even when we think of actors like Hezbollah, Hezbollah relies on Damascus for its resistance corridor for various reasons, but it's not necessarily so clear that it's just about Shi'ism. So, really, how long do I have? Maybe like 5 minutes?
Approximately 4 minutes.
4 minutes, approximately. Okay, good. So, really, I just want to kind of sum up what some of that means, and there are more details to go into that unfortunately I couldn't, but I want to kind of take some time with the summary. I think that when we think about this Shia response, whether we can talk about concerted Shia response, we can of course talk about the fact that Hezbollah, which is essentially a movement whose people subscribe to Wilayat al-Faqih, is fighting alongside the Iraqi militias that subscribe to Wilayat al-Faqih, alongside IRCG people who, of course are part of Wilayat al-Faqih, and we can say, yes, look, this is clearly a Shia response. We can also talk about the way that, movements that maybe beforehand would have been shooting each other, like various Sadr factions are fighting alongside maybe Asaib al-Haq or whatever, or the Badr Brigade. And so we can say, look, there's this clear coming together and cohesion of the Shia. But I think that we need to think about what this cohesion actually means. And I think the thing is that when you have people fighting alongside each other, and some movements, some of these actors are more able to give in terms of resources, in terms of training, in terms of direction, in terms of intelligence, in terms of strategy, in terms of tactics, then it's a natural occurrence that groups and even individuals begin to be drawn to those more powerful actors. The thing is a natural thing that happens in conflict. But the precedent for this, of course, is the involvement of Iran and the RCG and Al-Quds Brigade in the Jaish al-Mahdi, when, of course, their involvement there and their led to the gradual emergence of Asa'ib al-Haq, and then of course a great split in the Sadrist movement. So we can already see this what happens when various Shia actors get involved in the other actors' business. I think that we need to think about whether, because what we're really talking about here is Iranian involvement, whether this is deliberate or accidental. I think is it a case that Tehran is exploiting chaos in order to advance its reach in Iraq, or is it simply pitching in to fight defensive war? Well, I think that it would be a mistake to simplify it and just always imagine the scheming Tehran, but I think, and also to just rely too much on Khomeini's doctrine. I don't think it's necessarily a simple dichotomy in those two questions. I don't know whether it's definitely that there's this aim to, to increase the allure of Wilayat al-Faqih. But I think maybe it's more the case that if Iranian influence increases as an outcome of their support for the Iraqi government at the moment and the PMF, then it's hardly an undesirable outcome for Tehran. I think that when we're thinking about Iraq, maybe it's unlikely, and this could be a discussion point, that Iran will want to threaten too much the territorial and national unity of Iraq, because its projection and power is surely advanced by having Iraq as it is, as opposed to even more fragmented. But of course, the irony is that its involvement may well lead to that. When we think about the PMF, the Popular Mobilization, the Hashd, they're a parastatal body. In some ways they're subject to the Iraqi government, but in other ways, of course, they're subject to the aid of Iran. So I think that the effects to Iran's advantage will be gradual and cumulative. I think that maybe there will be, an increased number of militias under Iran's sway, and I think that this will lead to internal conflict among Shia militias. I think that we already see, of course, competition between Haidar al-Abadi and the factions maybe more oriented towards al-Maliki, and this is a wedge that can be utilized to increase Iranian influence in Iraq, and probably the elevation of al-Ghaban to the post of Interior Minister is quite instructive about how much this can be the case. I think that ultimately there's a discussion, maybe that I don't have time for now, but to be had to talk about why and how Sistani and Khamenei interact in terms of the Hashd and these fatwas, and how exactly and why it is that one will issue a fatwa, but then effectively the forces aligned to the other one will take the saber and run with it. What that means. But I think basically when we consider many of the things I've been talking about, and many that I can talk about in a minute, I think it's quite clear that what cohesion means is probably going to be it's going to be changed in terms of the power dynamics between Shia actors, which is going to lead, in my opinion, to fragmentation and perhaps even conflict tomorrow.
Thank you very much.